Hello and welcome to Global News Today, bringing you exclusive interviews with leading experts every weekday here on Arabiya English. I'm Tom Burges-Watson. Coming up on today's programme, as Israeli tanks push deeper into the heart of Gaza City, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is today holding talks at the White House with the US President Donald Trump, who has hinted that there could be a diplomatic breakthrough to end the war. We ask, what is President Trump's 21-point plan all about, and how likely is it that Israel will accept it? Hello and welcome. As Israel faces growing isolation over the Gaza war, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is once again turning to his closest ally, the United States. Well, today he's holding talks with President Donald Trump, who is hoping that Prime Minister Netanyahu will agree to a Gaza peace proposal aimed at ending the war once and for all. Well, this comes after a major diplomatic shift at the UN, where more than 150 countries, including the UK, France, Canada and Australia, now officially recognize a Palestinian state. Well, Netanyahu slammed that move as, quote, a disgraceful decision, insisting, along with President Trump, that it rewards Hamas. Well, at the White House, experts say that Netanyahu will receive a far warmer welcome and reception than he did at the UN General Assembly, where many delegates walked out during his speech. Well, let's get some more analysis now. We can speak to Paul Glastris, who is a former chief speechwriter to President Bill Clinton. He joins us now from Washington. Thank you very much indeed for being with us once again here on Arabiya English. You were, of course, President Clinton's chief speechwriter from about, I'm told, 1998 to the end of his presidency at the beginning of 2001. And, of course, President Clinton worked hard on this issue, right up until he left the White House, in fact. But does it feel to you like the momentum right now is comparable to those final years of the Clinton presidency?
Well, I think it's fair to say that this moment has parallels to that moment in the tremendous amount of pressure being put on one leader. Back then it was Yasser Arafat, who did not deliver. And in our moment, it's Benjamin Netanyahu, who so far has not bent, but maybe a promising moment, but it's an interesting parallel.
Okay, and of course, President Clinton proposed a Palestinian state, and that seems to be very much the essence of that 21-point plan that President Trump was referencing. And saying that everyone was more or less on board. I mean, do you see any significant differences or similarities with regards to this latest proposal and what President Clinton was proposing 20 plus years ago?
Ehud Barak, about a year and a half ago, predicted in the midst of the early months of the Gaza conflict that a settlement would look very much like what it was he and Bill Clinton presented to Yasser Arafat. I have not seen the map. I have not seen the details. So I can't speak to how close they overlap. But if it's true what you say, then, Ehud Barak was right.
Do you think the situation in Gaza troubles President Trump? I mean, from a human point of view, and do you think that's been something that's been perhaps weighing on his mind ever since he took office?
We have no evidence that such things weigh on his mind, alas. The things he said over and over and over and over again suggest that the pain of others is not what drives him. I do think he's driven by a desire for success, a desire for acclaim, a desire for a legacy, a desire to be seen as the person who could pull off what others haven't. So whatever the motive, if it's compassion, okay, I get no sense of that. But if it gets to the same end result, that's fine.
Well, if he does deliver that result, he'll have done something that's eluded, multiple US presidents. I mean, that really will cement his place in not just US history, but world history, won't it?
I think so. I think so. But, having lived through the Clinton attempts, you can get very, very close, and the fears and flaws of one leader can lead the whole thing to crumble. So if you go back and you look at July of this year, the same discussion, the same language was being used. Trump was saying, we're this close to a ceasefire. We're about to get it. I do think that the conditions are better now than they were in July, with the fact that countries like France and the UK are calling for a Palestinian state, and that the Israelis failed in their attempt to assassinate Hamas leaders in Qatar a little while ago. But the same political dynamics that have kept Netanyahu from cutting a deal all these many months and years are still at play, if not more so. So who can say? We will see.
Something you might be able to tell us, though, is obviously being close to President Clinton. I'm just wondering how frustrated he was and how he felt personally about getting so close to sealing a deal and yet not managing to crack this nut.
Immense frustration. Just immense. He threw everything he had into it. He thought he had delivered the best possible deal the Palestinian Authority and Yasser Arafat were ever likely to get, and then some. Yes, it was a great feeling of missed opportunity and frustration to the president.
And to what would you attribute the failure to strike a deal? Was there one single event or one event that stands out more than all the others?
I was not there. I was not involved in those negotiations. You hear different things from people who were. What I remember and what has always struck me is that Yasser Arafat failed to prepare his constituents for the deal that was being negotiated. And in the end, he felt he couldn't sell it because in some ways he didn't try. And I think people have said he feared for his own life if he would have signed on the bottom line. And I think that sounds right to me, but I'm far from an expert.
Well, one other name from those sort of times, from 25 years ago, is Tony Blair, and he's very much sort of on the spot and very much one of the men of the moment with regards to this 21-point plan. Do you think that's feasible, that Tony Blair could somehow emerge as being this transitional leader for the Palestinians?
I know he's active. I know he's a very, very able and shrewd negotiator. If the Trump administration and Netanyahu and others find it useful to have him involved, I suppose. Donald Trump doesn't like to be upstaged. And he's something that, Blair could bring something to the table that he couldn't get on his own. That would be my guess.
Okay, so we might see him perhaps emerge as being a key figure. We'll have to wait and see on that one. I mean, obviously something else that President Trump's going to have to be, is going to be very much on his mind at the moment is the Abraham Accords, a major part of his first term's legacy. And, were Israel to go ahead with something it threatened to do last week, which was to annex the West Bank, we could really see those Abraham Accords unravel, couldn't we? And I'm just wondering how much of an important issue you think this is for President Trump going into those talks with Netanyahu today?
Well, you've put your finger on it. The upside of it is immense. Because remember, this is the first time really that Benjamin Netanyahu is engaging in talks, at least publicly, about a post-war in Gaza future for Gaza. The big complaint within Israel is his refusal to engage in, what comes next. Now he's being forced by the situation to do that. On the other hand, if he refuses, you're absolutely right. The Abraham Accords then are really put at risk. So this could be catastrophically bad or quite, dramatically good. They're really at a knife's edge. And I'm not sure this one meeting will determine it one way or another, but it is certainly very pivotal.
I mean, who do you think feels more pressure going into these talks, Netanyahu or Trump, bearing in mind that back home in Israel, Netanyahu's got some people in his cabinet who have got quite strong opinions and very much to the right of the political spectrum. I'm thinking about people like Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich. I mean, they're not going to... I mean, how much sway do you think they have over Prime Minister Netanyahu and what he can and can't do? How important are their red lines?
Trump can walk away from this. I don't think there's any comparison. Trump can walk away from this. It could be a complete disaster. And it would, upset him, and it would be news for a few days. It would mar his legacy. But it is not something that American voters will... Very few American voters will, vote in the midterm elections or whatever, 3 years from now, based on that, unless a conflagration occurs that draws the U.S. into war. Whereas for Benjamin Netanyahu, this is existential. For Israel, it is existential. Not saying anything people haven't said a million times, but absent this war, Benjamin Netanyahu faces trial and perhaps imprisonment. That has been a motivating factor. And the White House is open about it, at least in blind quotes, that they think a big motivation of Netanyahu's not cutting a deal is to stay out of prison and to stay in power. So that's why I'm a little skeptical that Trump can pull this off, simply because he's tried multiple times. Biden's tried multiple times. And this is, these are red lines that Netanyahu would be crossing, a whole bunch of them, as you pointed out, with the base of his party, that he said he was not going to cross. So we'll see. But to answer your question, much more important to Netanyahu.
I mean, obviously, since the days of President Clinton and his diplomatic efforts, I mean, we're talking 25 years ago, I mean, a lot has happened. Even in the last 2 years, 66,000 people have been killed in Gaza alone. Lots of people have been maimed, people have been amputated, people have been orphaned. I mean, just looking at what's happened this last quarter of a century, do you think that makes the idea of two peoples living side by side all the more remote?
Alas, yes. And yet, what is the alternative? Yasser Arafat should have taken Bill Clinton's deal, is the answer. And the tragedy is he didn't. And we've been living with the consequences. And other presidents have made, mistakes too, allowing Hamas to be elected, in the first place, which happened at the behest of the Bush administration, in retrospect was a mistake. So a lot of failures have led us to this place. Let us hope that things are so bad that we have a turn for the better. I do think there's a chance of that.
Right. I was going to ask you to sort of wrap up this conversation. Does it feel like, we've reached a point of no return, really, in the sense that, as you say, things are intolerable. This is a stain on a lot of countries and weighs very heavily on the conscience of a lot of world leaders, what's happening in Gaza right now. I mean, does that make you optimistic that perhaps we have reached a point at which something will be achieved?
I wouldn't say I'm optimistic. I would say maybe now is the best moment in 3 years to achieve a breakthrough. I don't see Israel under Benjamin Netanyahu doing a deal that any Western powers or Arab nations can stomach, honestly. But I hope I'm wrong. I really do hope I'm wrong.
Okay, well, we'll find out. Well, thank you very much indeed. We hope to have you on the show again sometime in the near future. Paul Glastris, former chief speechwriter, President Bill Clinton, thank you for your time, sir.
Thank you.
Well, let's get more now. We can speak to Dr. Todd Belt, who is a professor and director of the political management program at George Washington University. Dr. Belt, thank you very much for joining us once again here on Arabiya English. I mean, we're about 2 years now, aren't we, into this war, very nearly. And I'm just wondering whether this looks to you like the closest point we've got to some sort of a comprehensive deal to end it.
Well, thanks for having me on again. It's great to be with you. This is the most comprehensive deal we have. However, it hasn't been negotiated with the two warring parties, which is really one of the problems. Of course, it's been presented to a number of Arab leaders. Benjamin Netanyahu is getting presented with it right now, right down the street from my office here, and we will see how he responds to it. Apparently, they've been talking preliminarily with the Trump administration for 4 days to get what they want into it. And of course, it has not been presented to Hamas yet. So I believe that is the next step, although there are some aspects of the deal that say that this can proceed without Hamas agreeing to it in certain areas where Hamas is not active.
Yeah, I mean, this is, of course, Prime Minister Netanyahu's fourth visit to Washington this year. And it's interesting that you mention Hamas because, you know, there are, of course, those who say Hamas should have nothing to do with the future of Gaza and the future Palestinian state, if there is one. And therefore, you know, that slightly begs the question, does Hamas even need to be consulted?
Well, right. If they're not going to be part of it, then do they even need to be consulted is kind of the problem. However, they have the hostages, and that is the key thing that needs to happen. They need to have the hostages released right away. That is the very first item to happen here. So that's a big part of it. The other issue is it's not just Hamas that needs to be not part of a future solution here, but also the Palestinian Authority needs to be de-radicalized, as they say, which reminds me a little bit of what the United States did in Iraq with the de-Baathification, trying to get the old guard out, and some of the Palestinian Authority people can be brought back in if they renounce violence. The other thing is they have to get a way for Hamas to turn over their weapons, and that's going to be a sticking point here because they don't have that idea quite settled yet.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to the new leadership of the Palestinian Authority, I mean, there are names being circulated. I'm sure you've seen the biggest of those names, the former British Prime Minister Tony Blair. I mean, do you imagine him heading up this transitional authority? And I'm just wondering, what do you think the Palestinians think of him, given his track record, for example, on the war in Iraq?
Yeah, I don't know that that is exactly going to be a realistic type of thing. Again, this is the U.S. and Arab nations and Israel imposing a new transitional leader on the area, and you have to think that they'd want to have the Palestinians choose their own leader as soon as possible in order to give the government some legitimacy so that it can continue to work in peace with their Israeli neighbors.
I mean, you've seen the plan, the 21-point plan, the leaked plan from the Times of Israel. And we heard President Trump saying on his Truth Social network, quote, all are on board for something special. I mean, it sounds like he thinks that everyone is going to come on board with this plan. We both looked through it. And obviously, President Trump is getting tired of this issue. I mean, it's a long-standing, I mean, decades-old problem. Not the only one he has in his in tray. He's got quite a lot of other complicated international situations to resolve. Do you see him somehow applying pressure to Netanyahu to get him to agree to this so he can chalk up a win here?
I think so. I mean, that's really the only way this gets done, because Netanyahu has been very clear he does not want a Palestinian state, and he wants Israel to be in control of the security in Gaza, and that is not what is in this plan. This plan calls for a multinational Arab force to provide security. So those two things are no-goes for Netanyahu. So how does Donald Trump turn those into a yes, which is really going to be the difficult thing? It's not like there's a lot of cards to play other than U.S. aid and support or other sort of security guarantees, intelligence sharing that might happen. But we do know one thing that the Israelis really are interested in, and that's called the BDS movement, which is boycott, divest, and sanction. They have been active in 38 states to make that illegal. This is when universities and corporations agree to boycott, divest, or sanction companies that are doing business with Israel, so they would not invest in those or something. They would withdraw their investments. And there's no federal law on this, and there could be. And that might be something that Donald Trump might get behind to push through Congress. That might be a card he can play here.
But I mean, look at it from this side of the Atlantic, and obviously we're sort of closer to the Middle East, where we are in the Middle East, where I'm speaking to you from, and you're obviously there in Washington. But I mean, Benjamin Netanyahu cuts a rather isolated figure internationally, at least seen from this part of the world. And he's quite an isolated figure domestically as well. And President Trump is really his last big international friend. I mean, clearly a very important friend, but one of a very small club. And I'm just wondering, can't President Trump just railroad this one?
Well, that's going to be the difficult issue. You see Benjamin Netanyahu about a week or so ago called Israel Super Sparta, right? Thinking back to the Peloponnesian Wars and the Battle of Thermopylae and the whole ideal of standing alone against all these enemies around the world. And he sort of relishes in that. But the U.S. is the one big partner of Israel, but it remains to be seen what leverage the United States has other than military support. There is the issue of bringing in foreign aid. Israel would not be required to be part of that. The U.S. and the Israelis tried to put some aid packages together, and that went terribly in Gaza. And this sort of removes that aspect for them in these 21 points. But it remains to be seen what leverage Donald Trump has. I would love to be a fly on the wall in the White House right now and seeing what sort of carrots and sticks he's got, because it doesn't seem like the U.S. has very much with Israel. And that's been sort of the tail wagging the dog internationally with the U.S. and Israel for a long time.
Yeah, and of course, President Trump wants to see the Abraham Accords expanded on this, his second term, a major achievement of the first Trump administration. And if Israel reacts in the way it suggested it might to, for example, recognition of a Palestinian state, which was announced by multiple allies, I think it's fair to say, of Israel in the last couple of weeks, by annexing the West Bank, that's going to be a red line for existing signatories of the West Bank. So instead of expanding the Abraham Accords, we might see them collapse potentially if countries pull out of them. I mean, that's got to be something that's going to be looming very large in the president's mind, isn't it?
Oh, I think so. And that's why Jared Kushner was brought back in to help negotiate here, because the Abraham Accords are his agreement. And the whole sticking point is, as you said, trying to get a number of nations to recognize the state of Israel. That is an aspect of some of the leverage that Donald Trump has. But don't forget, Donald Trump has an important personal relationship with Benjamin Netanyahu. They get along well. Donald Trump loves the fact that Netanyahu always says that he is the best friend Israel has ever had. So there could be some, personal leverage used in this negotiation as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a relationship with a few ups and downs, though, over the years. I mean, I can recall some exchanges over the last couple of years that weren't always friendly between those two men. But I'm just wondering, I mean, we've had quite mixed signals from the Trump administration on this. I mean, back in February, Gaza was going to be a theme park. Now it does sound a lot more like President Trump has come around to the idea of the two-state solution, doesn't it?
This is the big breakthrough here, as Donald Trump has come around on that. He wanted the Palestinians to be a diaspora throughout the world. And now he has come around to allowing these 2 million or so people to stay in their ancestral homeland, which is, of course, a big change on his part. And he has gotten some buy-in from other Arab countries about what happens the day after. This has been a big part of Donald Trump's negotiations that has been missing, really trying to think about what does a new Palestine look like, who's part of the government, who is not, who is contributing towards security, who is not. In the past, it has just been ceasefire, and hostages. This one is much more complicated and much more forward-looking for the Palestinian people, and that has been a big change for the Trump administration.
Yeah, and President Trump obviously talks to all his allies probably quite regularly, and pretty much every ally of the United States that you can think of will have told him pretty much the same thing in the last few weeks, bar one, which is Israel. I mean, he is going to be starting to think, actually, you know, I kind of need to come around to the way of thinking that pretty much every other ally I have seems to have on this issue.
That's right, and that's also been the case in Ukraine as well. So we've seen Donald Trump have an evolution on these issues that is more in line with U.S. Traditional allies. Of course, Donald Trump likes to be the disruptor. He comes in, says he's going to get everything fixed within 24 hours and doesn't want to depend on everyone. But now he's thinking more multilaterally and less transactionally. That is the thing. It's like it has always been, what's in it for him? What kind of deal can he get for America? That's how he always talks. Now he's thinking more about what comes next and how do we produce long-term stability in the region and peace, and that is a big difference. And you know, I know he's chasing that Nobel Peace Prize, and maybe this is part of it as well, and that's how he's come around.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's fair to say as well, reading between the lines, that he's rattled on a personal level by the reports coming out of Gaza. 66,000 people, we understand, have been killed. You know, multiple, I mean, dreadful numbers of children have been maimed, amputated. Do you think that's something that weighs on his mind? Is that something you interpret?
I absolutely think so. Donald Trump does not like war, and he does not like images of war. Remember when Ivanka showed pictures of the chemical attacks in Turkey to him, and that really changed his mind on that. And remember, during Donald Trump's first term, he had planes in the air launching an attack on Iran, and he turned them around when he found out that there was going to be a lot of casualties, a lot of injured and people killed by the attacks. So he turned them around and had them land back on their aircraft carrier. And so he is worried about war. We also know that he has a strong aversion to nuclear war. As somebody who grew up during the Cold War, that is something that resonates with him. And so there is a humanitarian aspect to Donald Trump's approach to this that can be used as leverage against him or with him.
Dr. Bell, as this conversation draws to a close, I mean, let's look at some time frames here, because this 21-point plan talks about hostages being returned and released, and within 48 hours of Israel accepting this plan, that's something that could happen. I mean, if we are extremely optimistic, could we see this week becoming perhaps one of the most pivotal weeks in the history of this war?
It certainly could be, but the question is, what changes is Netanyahu going to want to make to this 21-point plan, and will it be sent to Hamas, and will they get the hostages released? Right, that is the big card that Hamas has always had is the hostages, and if they give up the hostages, they have really no other cards to play other than giving up their weapons, and that is going to be the big sticking point. But again, we don't have the two major actors signed on yet. There is this plan. There is a lot of uniformity around it in terms of people agreeing to it, but the two major actors, the warring parties, have not yet. So there is a potential here. This is as close as we've ever come, but we really got to push this over the finish line, or Donald Trump has to push this over the finish line with both parties.
Okay, so just how optimistic are you personally, Dr. Bell?
Well, this is difficult. I am frankly, cautiously optimistic, I think is the way I would say, because we know that Netanyahu has drawn some real red lines, as I mentioned earlier, on a security force led by Israel or of Israel. And that's not what this plan has. Recognition of Palestine as a state has been a no-go for him, and that is certainly probably going to happen here. And it makes Israel more reliant on other nations for its security. And that is something Netanyahu has never liked. So that's why I'm a little bit cautiously optimistic. I think that Donald Trump may have some cards to play that we don't know of yet to push this over, but we know he is very strongly dedicated to it. He's brought in Witkoff and he's brought in Kushner to try to push this over the line. And I think we're as close as we've ever been. But again, got to get those two warring parties to agree.
All right. Well, thank you very much indeed. Really appreciate your time. Dr. Todd Belt, Professor and Director of the Political Management Program at George Washington University. Thank you very much indeed, sir. Well, let's just get a quick reminder to our audience. The US President Donald Trump has proposed a 21-point peace plan to the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu with the aim of ending the war in Gaza. Well, all of this comes, of course, in the context of Prime Minister Netanyahu facing increasing isolation, with UN member states recognizing the state of Palestine. Well, let's get some more analysis now. We can speak to Greg Swenson, Chair of Republicans Overseas, a friend of the show who joins us now from Italy. Thank you very much indeed for speaking to us, Greg. This is, of course, Prime Minister Netanyahu's fourth visit to Washington this year. What do you think can be achieved during his talks with President Trump today?
Well, I'm typically more cautious, but I think this time it seems a little different. I don't think the president would have hinted or teased the media over the weekend on Saturday if there wasn't something really credible here. So maybe they were working on some finer details in the last 2 days, but I just don't imagine that the president would leak that and the prime minister would fly over all the way to Washington if there wasn't something tangible to announce.
Right. We heard President Trump on Truth Social saying, quote, all are on board for something special. So as you say, it does sound like something is in the making there by way of a deal. Obviously, Prime Minister Netanyahu has expressed his opposition to a number of the points in that 21-point peace plan, including the two-state solution. I mean, how is President Trump going to get Prime Minister Netanyahu to come around to this way of thinking?
Yeah, there's a lot of challenges, and I don't know that the prime minister would agree, obviously wouldn't agree to anything that includes Hamas in leadership positions. But I do think some of these countries, like the United Kingdom, were premature, and I think did in announcing that they were recognizing Palestinian state. I think that was something that everybody would like to see. But it might have been premature. I think it was a mistake. It isolated Netanyahu even more, and in many ways rewarded Hamas. And the Palestinian, the PLO is not exactly clean here. And so I don't imagine that he's going to want to see a government run by the PLO. But then again, maybe he doesn't have a choice. We'll see. I mean, there's a lot of options that could come out of this. 21 points are a lot. I think the major ones are Hamas has to surrender or at least put down their arms. And of course, the hostages have to be released.
Right. So, I mean, there is this chance that Prime Minister Netanyahu will raise objections about some of those 21 points. But then at the same time, we have to bear in mind that the United States looks like being one of Israel's only stalwart allies out there, and is, of course, Israel's main supplier of arms. So, I mean, clearly, President Trump's got some leverage, hasn't he, here?
I think this is a good moment for the president to get involved directly, and that's maybe one of the reasons why. On the other hand, I saw Netanyahu on an interview with Fox News that was either last night or early this morning. And I think Hamas is in a very difficult situation. They've walked away from a lot of deals. I don't think they're in a position to do that anymore. This might be their only chance to sue for peace. And I think the alternative, again, is unconditional surrender, which nobody really wants to wait that long, right? I mean, I think that would be the best outcome. But on the other hand, they've dragged it on for so long, and that unconditional surrender has been difficult for the Israelis to achieve. And so if we can get to a peace settlement and stop the killing, absolutely, this is win-win. I think you have both the Hamas as well as Netanyahu in a position at the negotiating table, perhaps for the first time. And I think that's more Hamas for the first time, whereas Netanyahu has been there many times and has been willing to cooperate.
I mean, Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Trump have got a long-standing relationship, and it hasn't always been good. I think it's fair to say there have been some ups and downs in that relationship, as there are in most relationships. But I'm just wondering where it is right now, and where you think perhaps is there a chance that President Trump might start to lose patience if all he hears in response to those 21 points is a long list of objections?
Something tells me most of this has been negotiated already. And the fact that the president's stepping in, that's a really good sign. And you have a bilateral relationship now, or bilateral conversation between the president and the prime minister of Israel. That's a great sign. I know they've had conversations before, but this is different, again, because Hamas is in a much different situation now than they were even 3 or 6 months ago. So I think this is a great opportunity. Again, I don't think the president would have telegraphed it if there wasn't some good news. I'm not sure that Benjamin Netanyahu is there to negotiate right now. I think he's there to support the president and be received by the president, which is great. You're right. They have a great relationship. And the U.S., I think the president is unwavering in his support for Israel.
I mean, last week, Prime Minister Netanyahu and others in his cabinet were threatening to annex the West Bank. That would be a red line for existing signatories of the Abraham Accords and probably torpedo the chances of those accords being widened and enlarged to include other countries. How much do you think that's going to be present in the president's sort of calculations?
I think that might have been a negotiating tactic. Maybe just throw a little surprise in there. I don't think there's a lot of support for that, even though there are issues and there are problems on the West Bank. So I think that was maybe a pre-negotiation sort of arrangement by some of the people in his cabinet. I'm not taking it too seriously right now. I think that will be buried completely after this announcement this afternoon in Washington.
You spend a lot of your time in the United Kingdom. I don't know if you were there under the leadership of Prime Minister Tony Blair, but his name is quite sort of, it's doing the rounds at the moment because some are suggesting he could be part of the sort of leadership of the transitional governance of a future Palestinian state. How likely do you think that is?
You never know. I mean, remember, Rishi Sunak appointed David Cameron as foreign secretary. That was a surprise to everybody. I think Keir Starmer has made a few surprise announcements. I think the relationship between Great Britain and Israel has been really damaged in the last few weeks by Keir Starmer. He inherited a really positive relationship back in July of 24, and he's done it the best he can to really be overrun or overruled by the progressive wing of his party, which isn't necessarily the majority of his party, but surely that's an issue. And I think it was a mistake, and it basically eroded. It didn't terminate, but it has helped erode generations of really positive relationship between Israel and the United Kingdom.
I mean, the two-state solution's always been touted as being the solution. There just aren't too many alternatives, and no one likes the status quo. And yet we heard Prime Minister Netanyahu saying, last week at the UN, he said, giving the Palestinians a state near Jerusalem is like giving Al-Qaeda a state near New York after 9/11. I mean, that's incendiary. And I'm just wondering how you think that would have gone down with President Trump.
Yeah, I think, look, this is a difficult time, and he knows that, Hamas has been controlling Gaza now for years, and yet they, committed this atrocity on October 7th of 23. They have to worry about a neighbor that's run by terrorists, and I don't think any two-state solution should include a state on the border of Israel that's run by terrorists. So, I mean, he's got a point, and I think, it might be it might be a bit confrontational or provocative, but he does have a point. So, look, I hope they get to all of this today and they can ultimately be on a path to a two-state solution. But I think that it's not going to happen overnight. Basically, the the PLO and other parties have rejected two-state solutions over time, going all the way back to Arafat. So this is not new. And you could argue that they never wanted a two-state solution. They want to wipe Israel off the map. And that's obviously got to be something that's considered in these negotiations.
Do you think President Trump is on board with the idea of a two-state solution, obviously not with Hamas as a part of it?
Yeah, ultimately, yes. I mean, he even said that over the last 2 years. He wants to rebuild Gaza. He wants to, involve the neighboring countries in the rebuilding of Gaza. He has great hopes for Gaza and the people there, but that can't be accomplished as long as they're being governed by terrorists and their people are used as human shields. So I think the president is quite optimistic. I think there's, a really good argument for a Marshall Plan for Gaza at some point, not just by the Americans, but by the neighboring countries as well. So, there's a lot of upside, but obviously nothing can start, whether it's a two-state solution or the rebuilding of Gaza, until there's peace in the region.
You know the president well, and you know how he thinks and what his priorities are. And, the pictures out of Gaza are horrific. 66,000 or more people, we're told, have been killed. Thousands more have been injured. There are more child amputees in Gaza than anywhere else in the world. 2 million people currently displaced. How much do you think all of that weighs on the president's mind? Do you think it's sort of, do you think it's something that he rolls over in his mind and something that keeps him awake at night?
I would think so. I'm not sure, I'm not sure to what degree, but this is a very anti-war president. He is a very, very much a peace president. And that's unusual for, after generations of Republicans being known as sort of the hawkish party and the Democrats being the dovish party. That's sort of flipped. If the president wants to end this war, he's not afraid to use military force. You saw that with Iran. You saw it with taking out Soleimani. You've seen it. You saw it in his first term many times. It's always brief. It's always direct and focused. But I'm sure it pains him to see the killing that's going on. And again, I think he knows who the good guys and the bad guys are. There's always going to be unfortunate atrocities in war. I think he's made sure that the Israelis have done their best, and I think they have, with doing their best to try to save civilians, with the knock-knock bombs and giving them a heads up and giving people, providing text messages and they've completely lost the element of surprise. And so, this is something that I'm sure bothers the president, but he knows that Israel needs the support of the U.S., and I think they will definitely get it. That doesn't mean he doesn't want peace.
A lot of names are circulating. We've already talked about Tony Blair. Jared Kushner is now back, very much involved, we're told. I don't know if you can give us any insights on that. With this, the King of Jordan, other Arab leaders, all involved. So whose plan is this really, do you think, at the end of the day?
Well, I think it would be better, Tom. It's a great question. I think it would be better if there was collaboration in the region. I don't think the president envisions ever doing a forever war or, regime change like we saw with the invasions of Iraq and Afghanistan. You'll never see that again. It's really important for him to have collaboration, in the region. And I think you'll get that. I think, I think the first thing that needs to change is, to date, none of the neighboring countries want to accept refugees from Gaza. I think obviously that has to change, and maybe it will when there's peace, when the weapons are put down. So yeah, there's a lot of challenges ahead. I think having a Jared Kushner, a Tony Blair, who's had some experience with diplomacy, obviously, and going back to the Northern Ireland Accords way back when he was first prime minister. There's no reason not to have involvement from Jordan. Obviously, they're a neighboring country. And so there's a lot of good that can come from this if we can just get to a ceasefire and a peace agreement that the neighboring countries can live with, as well as Israel and Gaza.
So just to wrap up, Greg, I mean, one of the things that the report states about this 21-point plan is that within 48 hours of the ceasefire, the hostages being released, there could be some sort of peace struck. I mean, in a best case scenario, when might we see peace achieved?
I mean, it could happen quickly, Tom. Obviously trust but verify, or maybe with Hamas, don't trust and definitely verify. But I think there's great potential here. I mean, obviously Hamas started this on October 7th of 23. They've been keeping the hostages, which is it's unfathomable. But if they change and we could get the hostages back, that gives Netanyahu a lot of room to negotiate, to a lot of room for peace. Nobody wants this war to continue, but obviously Netanyahu can't take the risk of having another October 7th, which Hamas has quite often said that they want to repeat.
Okay, well, we're going to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed. Really appreciate your insights. Greg Swenson, Chair of Republicans
My pleasure.
Overseas. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks for having me.
Well, despite global efforts to end the war, the humanitarian crisis in Gaza continues to worsen with each passing day, and the civilian casualty toll is also rising by the day. Well, in the past 24 hours alone, at least 50 Palestinians have been killed in Israeli attacks across the Strip. That's according to Gaza's health ministry. Well, the war is now nearing its 2-year anniversary, with nearly 2 million Palestinians displaced inside the enclave. Let's take a closer look. Well, let's get more now. We can speak to Tamara Rifai, who is the Director of External Relations and Communications at UNRWA, who joins us from the Jordanian capital, Amman. Thank you very much indeed for joining us on Arabiya English. We're told that the humanitarian situation in Gaza is continuing to deteriorate. I mean, it's hard to believe that it could get any worse than it was, for example, last week when we spoke to humanitarians on the ground there. I mean, what is the latest on the situation there?
The latest is that mass movement continues as people get forcibly displaced from Gaza City, from the north of the Gaza Strip. So we're talking about nearly 400,000 people who have moved en masse from the north towards Khan Yunis and Deir al-Balah in the center area and towards the south. As a reminder, these two areas that people are moving to are areas that were expected to also witness famine now by the end of September. So people are forcibly displaced from where they are. Many of them, most of them, for maybe the 10th or 12th time in a row. Moving is not only excruciatingly painful, it's also very expensive. Moving a family costs over $3,000 between buying a tent, renting the land to put the tent, and renting transportation under the shelling and the bombing that continues, while all of us await a ceasefire that never seems to come. So situation keeps getting worse.
Yeah, I mean, and hard to imagine where people are getting that kind of cash from, in a part of the world where, the economy has been paralyzed for 2 years. And we heard from the head of UNRWA, who described the situation there as, quote, absolutely unbearable, hell in all its possible facets. I mean, just tell us a bit about what your staff are telling you on the ground, because I gather you got 12,000 operatives on the ground there in Gaza. Is that right?
Yes, and that's a miracle. It's a miracle that UNRWA, with its 12,000 staff, remains the largest operating humanitarian agency in Gaza. But our staff are like Gazans, so they're also on the move. They move from one place to the other, and when they get to the next place, they set shop again. They manage a shelter. They give medical consultations. They help pump clean drinking water to distribute in the shelters. Our staff are telling us that the situation on them, just on the rest of Gazans, is unbearable, with people losing almost everything. Children losing on education, people losing loved ones and family members under the rubble, unable to bury them, but also now for the last 10 days or so, with the additional forced displacement from Gaza to other parts of the city, whatever people had left with them, they no longer have, because they're moving for yet the upteenth time and losing whatever little possessions they have while they're trying to save their lives and their children under the bombing. Having said that, many of UNRWA's services continue against the odds in mobile health clinics, in health centers where we're still able to operate, even though we've had to close 2 health points in the north of Gaza because of the bombing and the situation. But our colleagues continue doing any services, including a little bit of learning activities for children and psychological support for children inside the shelters.
Yeah, I'm sure that's hugely important for the children who've really seen nothing but violence for the last 24 months, horrific violence. We spoke to a representative of MSF, Médecins Sans Frontières, last week. We understand they've now suspended activity in Gaza City. I mean, probably inevitable given the Israeli offensive there. But what does that mean for medical treatment, hospital treatment, the sort of healthcare provision in the enclave? Where are we in that regard?
It means that the near collapse of the healthcare system in the Gaza Strip is now even a step further to complete collapse. It means that pressure on the health points that continue to work is much, much greater. UNRWA has also had to stop its work in 2 health centers last week. You know, it's partly the bombing, partly the displacement, and partly also the lack of medical and surgical supplies. We've seen hospitals in Gaza, like the Kuwaiti hospitals, announce that they were no longer able to carry out surgeries and they would limit themselves to life-saving interventions. That is due to the lack of supplies. And the lack of supplies is due to the Israeli authorities blocking the entry of food, medical supplies, and other essential supplies to the Gaza Strip, which means that even with UNRWA's medical staff that are trained on public health care, even if they remain available, they're running short of what they need, the most basic things, painkillers, gauze, to treat patients.
Yeah, and Tamara, I wanted to ask you, because I was just looking at the Twitter feed of the Israeli Foreign Ministry, and they claim that 386 trucks are getting in every day. They say 404 trucks are awaiting collection in the Gaza Strip. I mean, I don't know how to interpret those numbers. Could you help us sort of decrypt that and contextualize those numbers, Tamara?
Yes, sure. Just in terms of figures, even before this war, between 500 and 600 trucks minimum were needed every day to cater to the population of Gaza, who was already then and there under a blockade. During the war, the access of humanitarian assistance, so the entry of food, medicine, fuel, clean drinking water, tents, blankets, etc., became a bargaining chip in this war, with the government of Israel one day allowing and many, many days not allowing. So if we're talking about 300 or 400 trucks, the minimum required even before this massive destruction was between 500 and 600 trucks per day. Now, what's really awaiting are around 6,000 trucks of UNRWA full of supplies from our warehouses in Egypt and Jordan, if UNRWA, the largest aid agency, hadn't been blocked from the government of Israel from bringing our supplies in. That is what's waiting. However, if there is some supplies that have arrived into Gaza from a crossing and is still waiting to be picked up, it's waiting because the process of clearance and getting permits for the UN and aid agencies by the government of Israel is such a cumbersome process that it can take up to several days for the UN to be able to go and collect what has come from the other side. That is where the blockage comes from.
Right. So this, what is touted, it would appear, as an achievement of 386 trucks getting through, is basically Israeli Foreign Ministry saying half as much of what's actually needed on a daily basis is getting through. Is that roughly what it means?
That is very much what it means, indeed. So there is nothing to hail, really. There will be something to hail when the border crossings are open, when humanitarian assistance, food, medicines, tents, blanket, fuel are flooded into Gaza, and mostly there will be something to hail and celebrate once there's a permanent ceasefire, which is what the international community has been calling for.
Right, we're going to come on to diplomacy in just a moment because I want to get your views on that just briefly. I know it's not exactly your area. But before that, I just want to ask you, sticking with this issue of food and supplies that aren't getting through, what do you make of this argument that we get told time and time again by representatives of the Israeli government that one of the reasons they don't want food coming in large quantities is because Hamas steals it? What do you make of that argument?
The counter-argument is the finding of the IPC, the global leader on famine and hunger. There is famine declared in the north of the Gaza Strip. There is famine declared because there has not been sufficient quantities of food going into the Gaza Strip since the beginning of this war. And what has been going in hasn't necessarily been the most nutritive. So there has been a lack of fresh fruit, fresh produce, high protein ingredients since the beginning of this war. And so short of calling the prevention of aid collective punishment to all Gazans, the argument is if that is the policy, then the result has been famine that risks now being spread into other parts of Gaza where people are moving to or being forcibly displaced to, such as Deir al-Balah and such as the middle areas, really.
Okay, so just give us an idea of what it's like to be a person in Gaza today. What's the most you could hope for in terms of nutrition, hydration? What would be sort of a typical calorie intake for a person living there?
The prices are extremely high. A bag of bread costs up to $30 per day. That's what the tenfold increase from what it used to cost. A family is very lucky if the family gets that bag of bread, but also a person is very lucky if after queuing for hours, they can get a jerry can of water that isn't necessarily fit for drinking, but at least it's fit for cleaning utensils and cleaning oneself. So every aspect of a Gazan person's life today, especially since the collapse of the ceasefire, every aspect of their life is punctuated with pain, loss, deprivation, hunger, but mostly lack of safety. So the best, to your question, that a person can hope for is not to lose more people from their family.
Now, I wanted to ask you, there's a leaked report which outlines the 21-point peace plan that President Trump is going to be discussing, we understand, later today with Prime Minister Netanyahu. UNRWA gets a mention. It seems like it's expected that UNRWA will be involved in Gaza's future once the hostilities succeed. I say involved in a formal way, recognized by the signatories of that deal, if indeed Israel is one of them. Are you optimistic by any of the reports you've been hearing?
We've been hearing all kinds of reports, and our position has been consistent. UNRWA is the backbone of the humanitarian response in Gaza because we are the largest with the biggest number of staff, the biggest number of warehouses, the deepest experience within the community, the deepest knowledge of Gaza. But also, UNRWA is very much intertwined with the history of consecutive displacement of Palestine refugees, having registered, recorded all the names of those who have been displaced now for generations. Now, UNRWA also is the provider of public-like services, including education and healthcare. We act kind of like a government, kind of like the public sector. Once there is a ceasefire, inshallah, in Gaza, the only agency or entity that's able to roll out almost immediately emergency education and emergency healthcare will be UNRWA, while other public-like services come back into the picture. We're truly irreplaceable, and that's probably the reason why, after months of vile disinformation against the agency in an attempt to undermine us, all of a sudden there's a resumption of mentioning of UNRWA as the irreplaceable UN agency in Gaza and for Palestine refugees in the region.
Okay, and just lastly, we haven't heard about the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation for a while. When they first started operating back in May, they were in the headlines daily for sort of all the wrong reasons. And I'm just wondering whether the fact that we're not hearing about them quite so much at the moment means they're getting better at distributing aid and getting aid in, or is there a case of media fatigue at work here?
There's probably a case of media fatigue, and it's good we're not hearing about them because we always used to hear about them in association with the killing of people who are queuing for food. And there is a realization that a makeshift, hasty, inexperienced entity that is highly politicized cannot replace an international UN-led system. And that is why there is, again, very strong referencing of the UN and of the international system. It is the same international system at play in other humanitarian crises. So it was really a lot of time wasted trying to replace that system.
Okay, well, we're going to have to leave it there. We're out of time, I'm told, but really appreciate you speaking to us. Tamara Al-Rifai, Director of External Relations and Communications at UNRWA. Thank you very much indeed for your time. Well, that is all we have time for on Global News today. Thank you very much indeed for watching. Be sure to join us again tomorrow for more exclusive interviews. Until then, bye-bye.